There would be less suffering in the world if most people followed the example of Jesus.
In East Africa, there's currently a very severe famine due to two different reasons. One is climatic because of a drought that's gone on for quite some time now, as well as violence in many of those countries, which has made it so that people can't go out and harvest or plant their crops.
It's in compassion towards people suffering should lead people to give money immediately for famine relief, but the desire for peace and an end to conflict, a desire for reconciliation, is what should motivate us in the long term to work for situations where people aren't hungry.
In East Africa, we've been very active with a food security program in South Sudan, in which we reach out to communities, help them plant and provide access to water as well as access to education. Similarly in Nigeria and similarly in Somalia. The cost of providing assistance in these crisis-type situations is relatively high, though a lot less if we do it early on. If we can invest in these countries, provide assistance to people both in terms of planting of crops and sheltering those crops and providing water security for them, as well as getting the food out there early on so that we don't have to do therapeutic feeding. It's actually less costly to invest early on in these food crisis situations than it is over the longer term.
For Catholics, issues of famine and insecurity internationally are obvious examples where we're called on to share the possessions that we have, especially in a wealthy country like America. There really isn't any reason in our world for people to go hungry. There's plenty of food, and indeed we even have the distribution networks to distribute that food. In many of these countries, it's ultimately civil unrest and various kinds of conflict that create these food insecure positions. So if there's civil conflict and people are driven off their land, they lose their crops, they lose their livestock, they really have no recourse to anything else. And so we tend to think of famine as some kind of an act of God, but oftentimes it's really the combination of certain kinds of drought conditions that we experience here in the United States occasionally as well, with this kind of civil unrest and lack of peace that makes it impossible for people to raise their food and for there to be enough food. I think it's important to recognize that people in the pew first can pray. They can recognize that these people are their brothers and sisters in Christ and that they need help. They can look for aid organizations like Catholic Relief Services and support them and their amazing work that they do. And then in the long run, they can help the United States play a role in seeking peace in these situations of conflict.